Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cricket Talks. I'm joined by the wonderful Ashjad from Cricket for Us, and we're going to be talking all about international cricket. Firstly, Ashjad, how are you going?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. As always, a pleasure to be here and very excited to talk all things cricket.
Wonderful to hear. So we're going to start off with Australia versus Sri Lanka. Australia won by 6 wickets. Glenn Maxwell hit 48 not out off 39 balls. Jai Richardson bowled brilliantly with, I think it's 2 for 20 off 4 overs. Ashton Agar bowling with figures of 1 for 14 off 4 overs and hit 26 off 31 when batting. And I felt like in this game, Sri Lanka, their bowling, Karunaratne and Van der Say, the rest were fine. They just sort of lacked a little bit, bowled too loose, and that was where the extra runs were given to let Australia have a win. But what did you think about that game, Asjad?
I'll give you a quick roundup. Australia has been very dominant. Apart from that super over game, I think it was the second T20. Apart from that, Australia's just looked far better than Sri Lanka this entire series. They've got the most runs. Josh Inglis and Glenn Maxwell, absolutely brilliant, especially in that game that we're discussing right now. Josh Inglis, someone who debuted about a week ago, and he's one of the highest run getters in the series. So it's great to see from an Australian perspective. You talked about, the bowlers from Sri Lanka lacking a bit of fire, and I completely agree with you. It's just that they're going through the motions. They've lost the series already. It's a 5 T20 match series. Now they are 4-0 down. They're genuinely just playing for pride right now. And some of them probably lost a lot of motivation, which does happen over the course of some of the battering that they have received to Australia. You talked about Jai Richardson. In terms of bowling wise, right? I don't know if you noticed this, but Sri Lanka were 83 for 3 or something like that at one point, somewhere around there. And I was like, oh, they might actually go past 150, 160. And the way Australia raked it back in, it was very Australia, let's put it that way. World T20 champions. It's exactly what I expected from that type of team. And then at the end, as we quickly discussed, the change up of having Ashton Agar open wasn't the best experiment in this particular game. But if they're going to use him as a pinch hitter and they're going to try new things out, I think that's okay, because the T20 World Cup is going to be in Australia. So why not give it a go? We've seen some pinch hitters work. If you go 20 years back, Shahid Afridi. If you go a week back, Sunil Narayan in the BPL gets a 50 of 13 deliveries, okay? So pinch hitters do work. It's not something that you should consistently do. But again, from an Australian perspective, it's an option they can utilize moving forward.
Definitely. And that Ashton Agar innings, it was slow, but the target wasn't that high of a run rate. So
yeah,
it was perfect. Perfect. Rightio. We're going to go into some longer format. New Zealand versus South Africa. And, well, basically New Zealand won by an innings and 276 runs. The New Zealand bowlers were fantastic today, weren't they? 5 wickets for Southee. Only 2 South African batsmen scored more than 11 runs. And New Zealand's batting yesterday was superior. There was, Henry Nicholls getting 100. Neil Wagner hitting 49. Tom Blundell getting 96. Matt Henry, 58 to him. And Colin de Grandhomme making 45. What do you make of all that game? What made New Zealand so dominant? Is that just that, or is there more to it? South Africa supposed to be the best. What do you reckon?
New Zealand is very difficult to beat. Okay, that's a fact that we've realized now, at least for the past 3 to 4 years, especially in Test cricket. Now you look at that side. New Zealand does not have Kane Williamson. They do not have Ross Taylor. They do not have Trent Boult. But what New Zealand does have is a special set of skills, or a special set of people who have some skills, like Will Young can come in and play a fantastic innings. Colin de Grandhomme can join the squad. They had Matt Henry come in, who took 9 wickets in the game with a 7 for in the first innings, 2 wickets in the second innings, and scored a 50. It was like his strike rate. I don't know. I haven't got the scorecard with me, but I think he's striking around 90, 95 in that particular innings as well. You talked about Henry Nicholls, 105, Tom Blundell, 90 odd. Everyone, 5 out of the 11 players contributed by scoring more than 40 runs. Imagine if you combine both the scores from the South African team, that makes less than half of what New Zealand made in one innings. So it's just dominant, because New Zealand is always dominant at home, but also the fact that South Africa only had 3 or 4 players who've actually toured New Zealand before. Dean Algar, maybe Bavuma, maybe Rabada, and maybe one more guy. The rest, they were very, very inexperienced in these conditions. And the way South Africa, the way New Zealand came out to bowl on that first day, when South Africa lost 3 wickets, it was like, okay, maybe Hamza and Bavuma and these guys can try and stabilize the ship, maybe Van Dusen, etc. But they just couldn't. They genuinely couldn't, because Matt Henry is one of the most underrated bowlers in the world. He comes in as a replacement every single time, does well, and then says, okay, bye, and then just kick him out to bring in one of their main bowlers back. And he's such a good utility player with the ball. It's really impressive the way he just comes in, takes wickets, and goes back away. So I don't think they were expecting someone like Matt Henry to actually start off, and he did, and he was so metronomic with his lines. The bounce he was getting, the seam movement, some of the deliveries, it was like Dean Elgar, one of the best opening batsmen over the past 5 years, was unable to play him. He scored less than 10 in the match. Correct me if I'm wrong. Bavuma looked okay in that second innings. You mentioned scored more than 11. I think if you take both of those guys out, it's like 30 runs between 9 players or something.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But this is what I would have expected if there was an Asian team touring New Zealand.
Yeah.
But the thing is, Bangladesh actually beat New Zealand in New Zealand because they didn't look at them as actual threats. Here, New Zealand was like, right, we have never won a series against South Africa in Test cricket. Let's put our best foot forward with the players that we have. And they have. They won it inside 7 sessions. Inside 7 sessions. You mentioned Tim Southee, 5 wickets. I'm so happy you got 5 wickets, though, because he's always one of those guys that comes in the second innings for New Zealand, because in the first innings, you have Jameson doing this, Bolt doing this, Wagner's consistent as anything. Can you imagine Neil Wagner comes in as, a night watchman or just in the middle of the innings and scores 49? Neil Wagner, for goodness sake, he's your number 11 batsman and scores 49. So genuinely, it was dominant for the sake of being dominant, but it was also dominant because New Zealand played to their strengths and the conditions, while South Africa seemed like they had no clue what they were doing.
Yeah, definitely. I 100% agree with you. That was a fantastic performance, and it's just a bounce back thing. Matt Henry has definitely got a big future for himself. That's for sure. And quickly on India versus West Indies, I know it's been a bit of a late night for me, challenging for us all to see it, but it's been a decent series. India played quite well last night, I would have to say, won by 8 runs. You know, Rishabh Pant hitting 52 off 28, and he got man of the match. Harshal Patel bowled a very good final over for India, and they put the West Indian batsman under pressure, and he got over pressure for himself. So that's India versus West Indies for you. Sheffield Shield, well, I don't know what to say about that. There's a lot of younger players coming through that are doing well. So Victoria trailed Queensland by 177 runs with 9 wickets remaining, and they made 1 for 172 at the moment. And New South Wales lead Tasmania by 71 runs with 10 wickets remaining. They're into their 3rd innings of the game, and that should be very good. And WA not playing till March 15. That's a bit annoying. I look forward to seeing them back on the field. Rightio, time to update the PSL. Ashjad, the game last night, Karachi Kings won by 27 runs. What did you make of it?
I'll give you a very, very quick roundup. Karachi Kings, 8 games, lost all 8 until yesterday when they beat Lahore. It genuinely looked like Karachi was going to lose this game until Lahore's batting from PSL 2021 and 2020 showed up. Because so far, Lahore's batting has been very, very consistent. They won what, 6 out of 8 games or something like that. 5 out of 7, sorry. And then in this particular game, they lost the plot, and they had to have a game like that. It was obvious. So it was now or in the playoffs. So I'm glad it happened now for those guys. But Karachi Kings played well. They're already out of the PSL. Multan Sultans are sitting pretty. They're qualifying for the top 2. Lahore Qalandars have 1 more game left. And if they can beat whoever they play next, which is Islamabad tonight, then we'll see them qualify in the top 2 as well moving forward. So crazy times in the PSL right now. And playoffs are going to be an exciting time. Yeah, you know who the top 4 are. We just don't know what the order of those top 4 are at the moment. And in terms of performances, Babar Azam consistently plays decent enough to have a good average and an okay strike rate, but his team keeps losing. But this was a sigh for sore eyes for him, because his team finally won a game. 8 out of 8 losses. This is the worst record in PSL history in as long as as the PSL started. On top of that, this is the lowest total that has been defended in this year's PSL. there are two things. Number one, Dew didn't seem to play a difference in this particular match. So for that reason, players like Chris Jordan, players like Imad Wasim, players like Mohammad Nabi, a lot of the Karachi bowling came into the forefront. The best bowler on the show was Mir Hamza. He took 4 wickets. And Mir Hamza is the type of guy who's been up and down in the domestic circuit, up and down in the international scene. But when he bowls well, he's got really good line and lengths. And if the ball is moving just a little bit, he'll cause some trouble. And he did yesterday. And Lahore just fell by the wayside. It's shocking to say something like this, that Karachi Kings has won a match, something I haven't said for 3 weeks since the PSL started. But I'm glad. I'm glad that they finally have a mark on the board saying 1 win and 8 losses, but they're out of the tournament. They're just playing for pride now, and very excited about the playoffs next week.
It's cool in sport when the team is kind of playing with nothing to lose. They sort of just give it their all, and it's such a good vibe. Righty go. One last question. Given the drama with Justin Langer, I have to ask, should international cricket coaches coach all 3 formats? I'll share my thoughts. Well, I'm a mix. You know, it depends on the coach and depends on their style. If it's a very much a test match player, then keep them for the test team. But people like JL, if they were to stay coach or whatever, they're definitely a 3 format coach, especially for test and ODIs. Maybe T20 is a different coach, but you know, I assimilate test and ODI having the same coach. Maybe T20 different. What do you think about it?
That's an interesting take, because I haven't heard many people say test and ODI together and T20 separate, but I understand where you're coming from. One thing I want to say, you mentioned Justin Langer. Let's talk about England just quickly as well. Chris Silverwood, he was coaching all 3 formats, and all the talk in England right now is, should England have 2 coaches, red ball coach and a white ball coach? White ball coach, someone like Paul Collingwood would be perfect. Red ball coach, they need to find someone who is a red ball expert. You go and find Gary Kirsten for the sake of argument. Try and freaking get Justin Langer, because England needs a decent test player and a decent test coach in this situation. From an Australian perspective, Australia won the Ashes. Australia are T20 world champions. I don't know how much that was credit to someone like Justin Langer. I think Justin Langer was a beast in the coaching zone as well as when he was as a player. But if the option presented itself, I would prefer to have 2 coaches. One for the red ball format, because that's a different mindset. Even if it's not a different mindset, it's a different way of playing the game. It's slightly more methodical, slightly slower. You have a lot more time, so you can adjust tactics, rather than from a white ball perspective. You do have time in ODIs and you kind of have time in T20s. But at the end of the day, the game finishes in 3.5 hours in a T20 game, while test matches can last up to 5 days. You have to have different types of mindset. You have to have a different type of approach for both of those. And if a person can adapt themselves, if a coach can adapt themselves, then all good. And I think they should go all 3 formats to 1 coach. But if not, then maybe they do have to consider different coaches for different formats, something similar to what they do with certain captaincy positions like Australia as well.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think the test and ODI simulation that I put up, if it's a test match coach, it just depends on how old they are and whatever. Like Justin Langer, in theory, he played 1-day cricket, but he hasn't really played too much T20. So test and ODI, he's probably a lot better than a T20 coach. If you pick a more elderly coach, perhaps that's 70 years old or whatever, probably only do test. If you want T20, aim for a younger coach who's played more T20. So it just depends on the coach.
I think one thing I want to add here is Justin Langer didn't play that much ODI either. He was majority test specialist. So maybe in that situation, he gets stuck into that bubble. And you have someone like Ricky Ponting who played all 3 formats, be your ODI and T20 captain coach.
And Ricky Ponting has played so many years. He'd be a great Australian coach. I think just depends. You know, Justin Langer, he'd probably be decent at ODIs, he'd be great at tests, and he'd be rubbish at T20.
Yes,
that's what
100%. 100%.
That's the way it's run. Rightio. I think that brings the podcast to the end. Thank you so much for joining. It was an honor. And it's good to be back on Analog TV making videos. We'll see when I do it next. Bye for now. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to Cricket for Us and subscribe to this channel. Share your thoughts in the comments and like this video. Bye for now.